They say I'm the smartest guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, and that is not to make a big deal out of clothing wear. And I don't care much about clothes, and you can tell I don't because I wear old shoes. My jackets are all very frayed on the cuffs, and today I'm wearing my favorite bow tie, the red one with the ink blot on it, and it's the only one that seems to go well with my checkered shirt. That I think Jeanette let me out of the house today without disapprobation. The name is David Toulis. We cover local economy and the free market here in Chattanooga and beyond. We're going to look now at the beyond and see the problem of you might say runaway policing, the police state, the Gestapo state in our country. We have it everywhere, and it is by the very nature of policing. Policing is a private function. It has always been in common law. It belongs to the people, but because we've delegated by consent and by clamor, perhaps we've delegated policing to the state. We now have this professional military class of people called the police, and even sheriff's deputies and sheriff's departments have taken on the policing model. That is to say, the law enforcement model, and you dare not exercise that function. You dare not make a citizen's arrest, which is your legal right in Tennessee to do. Dare not do that because you're tromping on their ground and their hallowed ground of enforcing statute against the people. And that is what policing is. It is part of the executive state, the humanistic executive state, and in many ways it's simply anti-Christian. It's anti-Christian because in the Bible, only the court has legitimate authority as the civil magistrate. The court and the sheriff, in the common law, the sheriff is the arm of the court. And in fact, you can see that structure here in Tennessee, where Sheriff Jim Hammond here in this county, Hamilton County, is the guardian and protector of the court and maintains the jail, which is intended to be the place where people wait a day or two, or at the most, for trial. Right? That's what the jail is for, to make sure that the defendant can have his day in court and make his defense. That's what he's there for, and to enforce orders of the judge. That's the limit biblically of the civil magistrate. But we've done better than that. We have now a legislative element of our state making new laws because God's laws are not sufficient, and then beyond that, an executive branch as well. And we have effectively executive government where the government is the only moving party in society. It is the only party that matters, the only party that moves. And we are all the better for it, right? Well, this is David Toulis, and in Virginia, the power of the executive state is being borne out in a case that we're going to give only sketchy details about because the man filling us in on this case is concerned that he might let something slip, and if there are members of the good people who are care about Virginia, they may pick up a helpful detail to their rebuttal, if you will, of the claims made by defendant John. John is the defendant, and helping him and discussing him now in his case about a Gestapo roadblock in Virginia is David Allen Carmichael. David, what is the story about that my listeners going to hear? What happened? I guess narrate what happened on the exciting day where John met the good people in blue.
Well, he's on his way to pick up his father-in-law to take him to some physical therapy. He's doing a ministry, a family ministry, and a duty. And he stops, and they have a road check. And he was there within the first 5 minutes of them starting. It was a second automobile. And they came to his window, and they asked him essentially to show his ID. They actually said ID, and it was recorded over and over and over. They wanted his identification. One time in the recording, the word driver's license came up. But in Virginia, let's just say you're driving without a license, then you would be a Class 2 misdemeanor. If you're driving with a suspended license, same kind of thing. If you're driving and you don't have your license with you, there's a fine. If you refuse to disclose it, it's a fine. So essentially, and this man, John, has served in the United States military, and he said to me the other day, and he mentioned his oath, and he's like, it still sticks with me. So for him, he understood that they can't just stop you on the street, whether you're driving or walking on the sidewalk, and say, identify yourself unless they're looking for somebody that looks like you. And then it's appropriate for you to tell them, but not so that they go do a criminal background check on you. Well, and then they went on to say, what's your name, what's your birth date, what's your social security number? And again, so they're pulling people over to do a criminal background check. That's effectively what's going on. So he continued to tell the officer, am I under arrest? No, you're not under arrest. Am I free to go? No. And so he understands that this is a voluntary compliance questionnaire issue. In his mind, he understood that. So what happened is they kept him there for a half hour, got the supervisor. He would not comply. They never told him he was under arrest until they busted out he had his car door locked, and they busted out his window because it was open so he could talk to them. And then they pulled him out of the car, put cuffs on him, then arrested him and said, you're under arrest and you have a right to remain silent. Well, he brought up in the conversation earlier that he didn't have to tell them anything. I have a right to remain silent? He kept bringing that up because he knows what the principles of law are. And so the guy mocked him when he said, since you already know all this stuff about Miranda and you're so concerned about your constitutional rights, you have the right to remain silent, blah, blah, blah. So they take him in. And then when the arrest warrant came, there was no search warrant. Of course, they're searching his car. They're searching him. They're seizing him. And he understands these principles. So that's why he wouldn't comply and it was always in a status of voluntariness. So he didn't volunteer. Now, once they arrested him, he was compliant because they had, gone to that extent. And they put on the arrest warrant, failure to comply, which led to obstruction of justice. And then, so what happened is, here's his charge. He's facing it. And it's the third time they've done this to him. They charged him with driving on a suspended license. Well, it turns out the first time they did it was complete fiction. So what they're doing is using the history of the first supposed conviction with no evidence as the evidence of his not having or having a suspended license. And, interrupt me if you need to. So here it is. At this point, now he's done. He's so fed up and he's going, we're taking this all the way. If it goes to the Supreme Court, and we're talking lawsuits, whatever you got to do. So what he did is he deposed 4 police officers. And we got this incredible questionnaire, very thorough. And it turned out we checked after drafting the deposition questions. We read a thing on how to draft deposition questions. It nailed it. So yesterday, he was supposed to be deposing 4 police officers. And they didn't show up. Wednesday. I got back yesterday from that. But deposing 4 police officers, and the day before, by a courtesy copy email, the Commonwealth attorney notifies him that she intends to make a motion to quash discovery. Now, they're trying to prosecute him, and the only thing that a deposition will do will obtain facts. You would think if there was a real crime that facts are the things that they want. In other words, he's doing the Commonwealth attorney's job because she didn't have enough to prosecute him on. So he's essentially setting it up so he could prosecute himself if it was legit. But since it's not legit, they understand that what they're going to do is be held accountable to the law and their behavior. And they're actually each of them subject to a lawsuit.
So David Allen Carmichael John is defendant. He still has not had a criminal trial, and the depositions Wednesday were to have fed that trial process. Is the trial still on the docket in that town in Virginia?
It's on the docket, yes. And 2 are traffic, 1 is criminal, and they're in the district court.
Well, what is my listener to make of this story? Where do his interests fit in? What does he need to hear about this man's resistance?
Did you hear? They may have heard on the news that they're coming out now with a facial recognition thing. So now, does a police officer just drive down the street and check your tag and registration, do a criminal background check on you, and pull you over? Some people, they do that too, but they don't do it to everybody. But essentially, they're very soon, as I heard on the news today, going to be able to just scan your face. And you say, well, I'm not a criminal. Yes, you are. If you read all the statutes, you would discover that you were a criminal. There's enough there that nobody can fulfill the law. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of the local state. And it's tragic that I use that phrase. But that's what's going on. It's now everybody's effectively can be put in jail for something. And if you challenge what they do on their own evidence with no evidence, they'll put you in jail for obstruction of justice. And that's the crime element. That's not a traffic thing. That's now a crime. And who's to say that you didn't actually obstruct? So now I will tell you what we did is we've had some discovery that I did as a journalist. And then I handed it and I sent it to John. And then that gave him information that understood that what they did, even in their own instructions, it says it's voluntary in interview. This is called a field interview for a traffic checking detail, is they can ask questions. In fact, it's mandatory. They shall request things. So it's an interview. So they're mandated to interview. But in an interview, everybody who's subject to the interview, it's totally voluntary compliance. They don't comply. No harm, no foul. If goes to the point of an interrogation, something they're mandated to, if you're mandated to go to a query by the state, you still have the right to remain silent. You don't get put in jail for obstruction.
Right.
So even in their own instructions,
David
was correct.
To assert your right, David Allen Carmichael, to assert your right to not incriminate yourself in a criminal matter is not obstruction, right? Because it can't be in our country that the assertion of a right is or can be converted into a crime.
Exactly.
Right? Not answering is not.
But this is their modus operandi. This is what they do with everybody in the county. And what we discovered was 4 people. They have to do a report after the fact. They pulled over 4 people in this hour. It was in a remote place, and there was 4 summons or warrants in those 4 pullovers. And when I checked the crime rate in that area, it turns out that county is probably, it might be the lowest crime rate in all of Virginia. It's insanely low crime rate, but for traffic checking details. Suddenly you have criminal after criminal after criminal in this obstruction of justice. And I met people just bumping into people that they found out John's situation. They had the same statement. Yep, they did that to me too. When I said, I did, and you got service members, ex-service members, and they asked, what are you doing this for? No, I'm not getting at your questions. La, la, la. No, it's on this obstruction of justice. And then they go to court and they negotiate into some weird, minor thing because they've got to find something they did that was wrong or else it can't justify the stop, So but what I was thinking is if you go to that courthouse, I've been there a couple of times now, it's hopping. How come this courthouse is hopping with people coming in and out of there paying their fines when the crime rate of this place is insanely low? They're manufacturing crimes. So this is going to be a longer kind of a saga is beginning. John's not going to stop at merely his exoneration in this particular matter.
Well, I think,
and then I can't stop because I think it's a story.
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with This is David Toulis, and we're talking with David Allen Carmichael, who's our correspondent, by the way. David, we have 2 correspondents. David Allen Carmichael is one of them here from 92.7 Nougat Radio and 95.3 HD4, where I, David Toulis, your host, argue for local economy and the free market. We're brought to you by yournews.com. That's yournews.com, and our number is 800-8949, 800-894-9. Now, David, are there some general principles of courage that you might offer to our listener? Not answering the officer's question, I think, is the first thing. My listener needs to know that you're not offending the officer if you say I don't answer questions, or I don't answer questions apart from my lawyer. Saying that is an immediate rebuff. Puts the officer on notice that, well, he has to have something more to deal with than you. In other words, he has to have something more than his original cause, and he'd better evaluate right now at the beginning of this friendly exchange what his substance of claim is against you, correct? Because he's trying to have you, my listener, generate enough material that will give him either a reasonable suspicion or a higher threshold probable cause. So flapping your gums, David Allen Carmichael, I guess, is the first sin. And my listener needs to be confident enough to not do that. I mean, it takes a certain measure of courage to say, I'm not answering any questions apart from my lawyer. And why am I under arrest? What's your authority?
Yes. And now the difficult thing, as we talked about last week, is they might just put you in jail and they may just rough you up. And most people don't want to be inconvenienced. It's not worth, home of the free, land of the free, and the home of the brave. They don't really take that. They sing the song and don't take it seriously. That's an oath almost, like when you do your singing and you're pledging, right? You're pledging allegiance and you're singing a song you know what I mean? So I think there's
I don't know because I don't take part in that.
That we are commanded not to give an oath, and I think we're speaking and singing a lot of oaths and confessions that aren't really living up to them, but we're accountable to it. And I think there are, and again, I think it's a very small majority of people, sadly, that are really taking conscientiously those things they say and sing as something as an obligation.
Now, David, just fill my listener in briefly. You're a former submariner, meaning a submarine crew member.
No, I'm a anti-submariner. My job was a surface sonarman, so I only spent a week on a submarine underway in an exercise.
Okay, so you were
a consultant.
You were part of submarine warfare,
making noise with their sonar, and I had to give them a little coaching. So that was, and I did undersea warfare planning for a battle group. It got pretty exciting
now,
eventually.
Tell my listener why you and I have an affinity. Why are you kind of a remarkable American standing your ground on constitutional rights? How have you done that, David Allen Carmichael?
And I'm going to back it up to the higher authority. No authority's been all authority's been given unto me, Jesus said before he departed the planet, right, or physically. And so is him as the highest authority, and Jesus Christ, I've confessed with my mouth, is the Lord of my life. And then when I made a confession, I had to think about when I made an oath to the Constitution, wait a minute, this is before Almighty God. This is so help me God. I'm on the hook. So I counted the cost when I joined the military, not just my life, my soul, my behavior. In fact, it came in conflict in the military when I would have to hold people accountable to their behavior, to the regulations, instead of just what we normally do. Okay? So having a lifestyle of holding people accountable to the higher authority in your own life and those that you're dealing with, it doesn't stop. And I think, and of course, when I was in the military and I made a request for religious accommodation, it wasn't taken very well. And I kept seeing everybody violate the law. I ended up having to sue the United States, and I didn't have a lawyer to do it. So I had to do everything necessary that a lawyer wouldn't even do what I had to do. And that's why people lose a lot of cases and pay a lot of law fees. But I had to learn what is right and what is wrong. What are God's expectations? It turns out that God's expectations show up in the laws of men. And the more knowledge you have, the Bible says more sorrows. He's a higher accountability. So it comes down to your confession, your oath is what you say true.
Well, how did that understanding of God's claim upon you affect your dealings with men, particularly your constitutional liberties, David Allen Carmichael?
Well, I know I have a duty. I report people a lot. In fact, I've prosecuted people for crimes against me. And so I've done that because I know the authority structure. And then so I know a duty. And if a man knows a good he ought to do and doesn't do it, to him is sin. Sometimes it's inconvenient to prosecute somebody that needs to be spanked. But, what have you said? What do you do? So I've prosecuted people. I've defended myself. I've had lawyers come after me and sue me for things that were frivolous. I ended up beating out on a lawyer. How come I out-lawyered a lawyer? I don't really know how to answer the question, except it's become a lifestyle. Is when your confession is true, your persona comes out in everything you do. And so I think, and at this point too, when I see somebody is getting thrown into the ditch and they don't have the ability to help themselves, it's almost like, again, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that would mark the armies of the living God? Jesus said, what we do to the least of these, we do to him. So I see one of the least of these getting beat up or harassed or pressured, and they haven't had the wherewithal to hold these color actors that are acting under the color of law accountable to the law. I ended up, almost as a lifestyle ministry, helping people because I can't help myself.
Well, just briefly, we have just half a minute left, David Allen Carmichael. What's ahead for John in your defense of him?
What I think, well, he's already, before they actually had their motion in, he had an objection before theirs was even turned into the clerk. His objection was in 2 minutes before the clerk's office opened. And then he followed up with another objection the next day because went to the depositions and nobody showed. And the Commonwealth attorney calls by speakerphone and says, "Oh, nobody's coming today." So he went home, cranked out a objection there. And it turns out, while he's preparing this objection, we discover in the rules of court that he's abiding by the rules of court, and the Commonwealth attorney is violating the rules of the Supreme Court. So, and I think what happens is everything is starting to stack up, and for his favor. And one of the things in the little study that he found online was at the very bottom, it was a commentary on when you start to fiddle-faddle with discovery. I think they use that term. It's just showing your desperation.
And it shows bad faith too, David.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Bad
Yeah,
faith.
the word bad faith went in one of his objections.
Yeah, that's a great concept. You want always to have your enemy show by his actions or inaction bad faith. David Allen Carmichael, thanks for joining us.
Okay, bye-bye.
This is David Toulis. David Allen Carmichael is a former Navy man who fought over the lack of a Social Security number. That was one of his big battles, and has had a remarkable career defending his person, shedding the corporate status that connections with federal government and the corporate government have. And that was one area. David Toulis here. We are 92.7 live on Facebook, live on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. And now, our sponsors support all of our wonderful sponsors. Thank you.